Well, Germany's economy faces two major shifts: Chancellor Merz's fiscal stimulus plan and the impact of US tariffs. Spring fever appears to be hitting Germany's economy. The IFO Institute's Business Climate Index reached an 8-month high in March after lawmakers approved historic defence and infrastructure spending increases, outweighing US tariff concerns. Early this week, the Purchasing Managers Index showed German private sector activity growing at its fastest pace in 10 months. For more insight into Germany's economy, let's bring in Remi Piet, Senior Partner at Embellie Advisory. Always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us, Remi. Is it too early to call an end to stagnation, do you think?
Well, we still have to see the impact that those measures will have, obviously. But what has happened over the last couple of days in Germany is really a paradigm change for the leading European economy. And the fact that, it had engaged into this path of limiting its deficit to just 1% over the last decade, unfortunately has limited its capacity to reinvest into a series of its economic capacities, and also obviously become very, very dependent from other countries in terms of defense efforts. And so those changes and modification of the constitution, allowing the German new chancellor that will be in place very soon to invest into the economy with a budget of $500 billion over 12 years on infrastructure, on climate change, but also more importantly the change of the rules of deficit that will allow Germany to invest into its defense industry, especially, but also other sectors, was very important at the time when Germany was very vulnerable to two main forces. Obviously, the lack of access to cheap energy. That was the case when Russia was supplying natural gas to Germany, but also potential larger competition from Chinese companies that actually has limited the exports towards China. And it was very important for Germany to change the software inside its economic system by allowing more investments and potentially, and at the same time, more deficit indeed, but more investment into an economy that was trailing behind.
Now, Germany's landmark historic debt reform cleared its final hurdle in Parliament on Friday. What does this €1 trillion spending package entail?
So there's half of it is meant to focus on armament and defense industry efforts, and Germany has always enjoyed a very peaceful environment over the last 20-30 years, and has never invested in defense industry more than 1% a year. I think that was the highest over the last few years, and that reached 2% only last year. And the objective is really to be able to build the capacities for Germany and potentially to be a European pillar of NATO, or to build more partnerships into the European Union and become much more independent from potentially protection from the US, or be able to stand up to a Russian aggression in the future. And so that really changes in terms of geopolitics and relationship between countries. That is a huge shift. The other part of it is $500 billion, as I was mentioning, is meant for infrastructure investment, but also at the large scale energy transition aspects to it, especially when Germany has turned its back to nuclear energy. It's very important to be able to find other sources of energy onto that front, and it is meant to, as I was mentioning, to re-strengthen the competitiveness of the German economy. Something that hasn't been able, past chancellors haven't been able to invest in the German economy because of this sacrosanct rule of 1% of deficit.
But how much can fiscal measures really do to improve the economy's competitiveness? I mean, how is Germany's ability to address economic issues hamstrung by its strict limits on government debt and deficits?
No, but you're absolutely right. Fiscal measure is one element of the picture, but when you actually announce the capacity to invest $500 billion in infrastructure over the next decade, you send a very strong signal, both to market but also to private investors, showing that there's a clear, especially at the moment where you have a change of government in Germany and new stability starting for the near future, you definitely put together the conditions for a rebound of your own economy by allocating both fiscal incentives, but also giving clear signals to private investors and European partners that now seeing that Germany is playing the European card of investing into this economy and welcoming also other companies from the European continent, and it's not going to be just bandwagoning on the rest of the European economy or on American defense when it comes to it. It'd rather be a central actor of the future of Europe, both on this defense sector but also on this economy, re-strengthening this, and that will have very, very strong impact for France, for Italy, for Poland, for a series of European countries for whom Germany has been for a long time the #1 trading partner. And the fact that the German economy was ailing over the last few years has been very difficult for their neighboring countries.
And some business leaders argue Germany needs to really compete more against a growing rivalry in markets that German firms once dominated, like cars and machinery. How can Germany now do that when it's trying to navigate this environment that involves strong tariffs from Donald Trump?
That there's the decision and first speeches from Merz, the incoming chancellor, seems to show that there will be a strategy to focus on the European continent, to work very hand in hand with France, with even England, which is not part of the EU anymore, but work closely with them to try to create and relaunch the European economy that is still ailing from the COVID pandemics. And this kind of influx of new money into the number one economy of the continent is going to be a very strong incentive to be able to create the conditions for future growth. And as I was saying, indeed, the car industry and the automotive industry has been strong for a long time the leading sectors of the German economy, but there needs to be reinvention of the software German economy, by investing into IT, investing into new types of equipment, infrastructure, all these that hasn't been possible for the last decade, and has really hurt the competitiveness of whether it's the German automotive industry or other sets of industries that were not facing the support from the government, but also finding some fiscal incentives for them to reinvest into the industry itself.
All right, Remi, Piet, we'll have to leave it there. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Sally.